Genesee Theater has a lot of history behind it, including the rise and fall of business and how entertainment has evolved. The history of Genesee began in 1926 when A.L. Brumond, A.C. Burnett, and D.T. Webb bought the land. The land used to belong to the YMCA up until 1923 when they put it up for sale. Then in 1926, the three men bought the land for $130,000. They began construction in September of 1927, and 3 months later, Genesee Theater was ready to begin business.
The grand opening was on December 25, 1927. The first movie showed was Valley of the Giants, directed by Charles Brabin. The movie sold so many tickets that there had to be 4 showings that day. The reason for these 4 showings is because the theater had a seat capacity of 1,800 seats. There was about 7,200 people that showed up, and it was estimated that there would be 8,000. After opening night, the owners and those who were part of the making of Genesee Theater had lots of recognition and were advertised by many local businesses.
The 1920s was a start for Genesee Theater. During this time, programs would change every Sunday, Monday, and Thursday, with admission being 50 cents for adults and 25 cents for children. On Sundays and holidays, the admission would be 60 cents for everyone. In 1928, Genesee Theater was the very first theater to show motion pictures, along with a live orchestra. Also, in 1928, it held its first wedding, and the hype for weddings at Genesee continued into the 30s.
The weddings were private performances to legitimize marriage. Only the ceremonies happened, and all other organizations had to be done by the party. In the 30s, as well as weddings, they had contests like Miss Fashion Queen, dance, and archery. Cooking schools were also an option. Also, the ticket prices were 25 cents when other places only charged 15 cents. This all happened because the theater had to stay afloat since this was the time of the Great Depression and the owner's suicide. The owner was A.L. Bermond, and his suicide was in 1931 when he hung himself. Another owner, D.T. Webb, died in 1937 from a heart attack. Because of his death, in November 1937, YMCA took over the theater. Then in 1939, World War II started, but the U.S. didn't get involved until 1941.
During the early 40s, war-based movies were shown to honor the men who were fighting during World War II. They showed respect to those who were overseas but only lasted from 1941 to 1945. In 1941, servicemen received a discount for tickets. During this time, showings were still under the price during the Great Depression. The first war-based movie shown was A Yank in the Raft. The movie was interrupted for about 30 minutes by President Franklin D. Roosevelt for his speech about the servicemen. Throughout World War II, everyone would purchase stamps in support to those serving. The theater helped by convincing people to purchase them. After World War II, prices were still cheap, but only for the war veterans and their families on certain weekends.
In the 1950s, new changes started going on. In early 1952, the theater got a new look with new seats, carpet, and a better sound system. In October 1952, local gang comedy was showed. It was filmed in Waukegan Park. The manager then was replaced from John Mitchell to Don Burmester in 1953. In March of that same year, Genesee showed its first 3D movie. 6 weeks later, their most popular movie was featured. Then, The Robe, a CinemaScope movie, was showed. Popular motion pictures would have a duration of 2 weeks. Genesee tried getting more of an audience in 1954 by starting to show previews to catch the eye of viewers. Things started getting worse in 1957 because of a concern in the city.
The 60s was the beginning of the downfall for Genesee Theater. Stage shows started ending and recitals were performed at random times. Also, it was rumored that the theater was haunted. There would be sightings of a young girl wandering around the balconies, but there wasn't anything confirmed about this. However, there was a death in the theater. Jacob E. Litz, the theater's projectionist, died in the projection booth from a heart attack on May 23, 1962. The movie Cape Fear was featured in his honor.
During the 70s, there was less live shows and activities but more movies. Only during the week, live shows would go on, and in the afternoons. Other shows would go on all week during 1972. John F. Roberto took over as manager in 1973 and continued until the end of the 70s. Plitt then handled the technical features of the place in 1974. The mayor, Frank Wallen, of Waukegan, died in September of 1976. He was in a band that played in the theater's first day in 1927. In the year 1978, Genesee had its 50th anniversary, although it was a couple months late.
The 80s was a new chapter for Genesee Theater. it was the beginning of the live shows. The reason for change in entertainment was because of financial issues and also to be more involved with modern day entertainment. Along with the change in entertainment, there was also a change in ownership. On February 1st, 1982, Genesee Theater was sold to Leslie and Jean Morris. In 1984, the first live show was performed. It wasn't long until Genesee Theater had another downfall.
In the 90s, shows scheduled in this decade were never performed. Also, the apartments above the theater needed to be evacuated within the month. The building went bankrupt, and due to that, it was up for sale. Starting price was at $2 million to $20 million. There were many people interested in buying the theater, but due to the high price, no one could really afford it. The people of Waukegan didn't want to see Genesee Theater go away, so they came up with ideas to restore it. Ideas were spoken out, but nothing was really set. In the end, companies like Theater Projects Consults, Web Management Services, and OMS funded the theater to stay up and running.
Towards the end of 1999, a committee was put together to restore Genesee Theater. The committee was made up of both funders and local citizens. A few of the funders who helped with restoring Genesee Theater were Ray Shepardson, Jim Neal, and GSI Architects from Ohio. On December of 2000, an open house was held at the theater for public recognition. In January of 2001, the Waukegan City Council granted bonds that were worth at $20 million for renovation for the theater. The first renovation was the seats, then the expansion of the stage, and finally the front entrance. The apartments above were also renovated to be office spaces. The chandelier in the lobby was relocated in the stage room. On December 25, 2002, Genesee Theater finally reopened to the public. To this day, Genesee has managed to stay alive by having live shows, performances, and plays. An entertainment show has evolved throughout all this time. But through it all, the history of Genesee still lives on.
Let's dance in style, let's dance for a while. Heaven can wait, we're only watching the skies. Hoping for the best, but expect